Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good afternoon. Thank you for joining me, Sheikh Muhammad Saifuddin bin Sheikh Muhammad Saleh from the Center for Science and Environment Studies, Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM. And in today's episode of Man and Nature, produced by Hajah Mazlina Ismail, we will continue our discussion in highlighting issues pertaining to the environment, especially climate change. And today, we will touch on a very specific topic entitled Melting Ice from Global Warming. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed listeners of Radio IKIM, in recent years, there have been a growing corpus of literature on climate change, and this includes literature discussing climate change from an Islamic perspective. And this shows that Muslims have taken note of the problems posed by climate change, triggered, among others, by global warming. As such, we have initiatives launched by Muslim scholars and environmentalists, such as the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change in 2015. Yet, a statement without meaningful action does not bring about the desired change, especially if we, the general public, lack a true picture of the severity of the problem. And therefore, today, Man and Nature is honored to have with us a special guest who will be highlighting the acute problems pertaining to rising sea levels and global warming. With me today is geospecialist Dr. Mohammad Hafiz bin Joffrey, senior lecturer at the Faculty of Science and Marine Environment, University Malaysia Terengganu or UMT. Assalamualaikum Dr. Hafiz, and thank you for joining me today in today's Man and Nature.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shay, for the very warm welcome. And I think it is not too late for me to wish to everyone Selamat Hari Raya Aidil Fitri Maaf Zahir Batin. It is with great pleasure to be here today to share with everyone a bit of what I know and greatest appreciation to Ikim for providing myself with this opportunity to share my knowledge with the listener. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz. Selamat Hari Raya Aidil Fitri to you too. So, without further ado, let's begin our discussion for Men and Nature today. Now, Dr. Hafiz, some of us may have heard about Thwaites Glacier, which is in the Antarctic and is often dubbed or often known as the Doomsday Glacier. And this particular glacier may potentially trigger a 65 centimeter rise in sea level if the glacier fell into the ocean because of the ice shelf collapsing, which in itself is actually providing support to the glacier all this time. Now, for starters, please share with us why the geography of this icy Earth is important for the world's population.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Shay, for the question. So first of all, it is important to know that the world's largest glaciers are located in the Greenland and also in Antarctica. And over down there in Antarctica, it is further divided into two regions, which we called as the first one is the smaller West Antarctic ice sheet, and the second one, which is the larger East Antarctic ice sheet. However, even though West Antarctic ice sheet is much smaller, but it is actually thought that it is more unstable compared to its eastern counterpart. So, why is it important for the world's populations to know about this geography? Is that one thing we need to know about is that throughout the geological timescale, we have been experiencing a cycle of inter and intraglacial periods. So during the interglacial periods, we can say that there is absolutely no ice present on Earth because of the Earth temperature that is too hot, and that has actually caused the sea level to rise. And counterintuitively, during the intraglacial period, especially during the last glacial maximum, which happened approximately around 15,000 years ago, the Earth experienced a period of very cold environment, which has caused the ice to spread across the entire globe, and that has actually caused the sea level to drop. So now, why are we concerned with the sea level rise? So to put it simple, sea level rise has the potential to inundate low-lying regions, and when combined with storm surge event, it can actually potentially cause coastal erosion, and a lot of this area, which can potentially be used for other purposes, for example, tourism, agriculture, housing, and the list goes on, may be reduced because of the insufficient areas caused by the inundation of ocean water. So now sea level rise happens from global warming and climate change based on two factors. The first one is the thermal expansion, which basically meaning that when the ocean water warms, the water molecule will expand, and that will actually cause sea level to rise. And the second factor, which is the major factor, is the melting of ice. So now, how did temperature rises? Because it actually relates back to the industrial revolutions happens the beginning in 1880, between 1850 to 1880. Okay, so during that time, there's a lot of innovations that happens, and we consume um, a lot of fossil fuel, and that has actually contributed to the increasing amount of carbon content in the air. And this carbon acts as the greenhouse gases, which actually trap the sunlight from escaping into the outer space, and that has actually caused the temperature to rise. So the year 2020 has been recorded as one of the three hottest year when we compare with the average temperature between 1850 to 1900. So coming back to the question, if let's say both the Greenland and also the Antarctica melts completely, it could potentially cause a sea level rise of about seven meters for Greenland and around 60 meter for Antarctica, where 3 to 5 meter comes from the West Antarctic ice sheet, and the remaining 55 meter comes from the East Antarctic ice sheet.
Okay. That sounds scary, to be honest. But picking up on what you mentioned, melting glacier has the potential to raise the sea level, and this definitely has the potential to inundate low-lying regions. Now, in your opinion, why is that the block of ice melted at an accelerated pace within the century exceeds scientists' expectation?
Okay, so um, the reason is because scientists need data to assess the situation, much like with the COVID 19. When we actually thought that we understood this virus, suddenly there is a new mutation, there is a new variant, which basically act differently with vaccine compared to its previous predecessor. And why do that happen is because we are not fortune teller. Okay, whatever we do, we need data to help us with the analysis. So same goes to the melting glacier. Just when we thought we managed to crack things, somehow there are new information based on new data set, which has helped us to improve our knowledge. One of the challenges is to get continuous, good quality, and also wide range data. And because of the limitations of research budget and obstacle to assess certain places, that has actually caused us to sometimes make an assumption. For example, we need to assume things based on our understanding of the science in areas where we don't have sufficient data. For example, the sea bottom temperature. It is actually very hard to get the sea bottom temperature uh, um, covering a very large areas, because we need to have money to buy the equipment and deploy a lot of these equipments over large areas across the ocean floor. And once in a while, we need to perform maintenance to ensure that this equipment works well. But that is at the moment, I can say that it is quite impossible, because um, uh, because of the limitation that I have discussed just now. But we do have a large data for the sea surface temperature from the help of the satellite. Obviously, the temperature of ocean across the water column is different. The surface ocean temperature is different with the bottom ocean temperature. But because we don't have the ocean bottom temperature data, we need to make an assumption, and we need to treat ocean water column as homogeneous, meaning to say that the temperature either on the surface or at the bottom are the same throughout. But obviously, that does not reflect the real world environment. And because of these limitations, most of the time, some climate change events on Earth may exceed our expectation. But of course, over time, new technologies are being developed, and so we can expect that there may come a time in the future where it is easier for us to get good quality, wide range, and also continuous data. Um, Currently, there are many uncertainties because of the limitation that I have told you just now. For example, the thermohaline scalation. We know that these ocean scalations processes help to transfer excess heat energy from the equatorial tropical regions to high latitudinal area. However, as the Earth temperature increases, more and more heat energy is being fed into the ocean, and that this heating causes the ice sheet to melt. But we are not sure how much heat and energy has been transferred to Antarctica and also Greenland from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution up until now. And so we are not sure precisely how much ice has been lost into the ocean. We can make an assumption, but we are not really sure precisely how much does it contributed to the increasing sea level.
I think that's a challenge with any fields of science, including climate science, because definitely there is a limitation in terms of technology, in terms of budget, as you rightly put. Dr. Hafiz, how does the melting of ice sheet impact the natural world, which includes the oceans, animals, and also the world's population, especially if you look at this from the aspect of food safety, human welfare, and also health?
Okay. Sea level rise, when we combine with the storm surge event, can potentially cause coastal erosion. And this is what is happening along some parts of the coastal areas in Terengganu. And this erosion obviously can affect the socio-economic activities near to this eroded region. For example, as I have mentioned, the tourism, the agriculture, the housing, because of the limitation of the spaces. Most of the land has been reclaimed by the ocean water. um, from the food security point of view, however, I have to say that I am not directly involved, but if you think about it, sea level rise can also affect food security, especially at low elevation areas. So what happens is that when the sea level rises, low-lying areas will sink, and so this will also reduce the areas or spaces that can be the potential area to be used as an agriculture. Apart from that, saltwater intrusion from sea level rise can basically affect the groundwater quality, and that can be detrimental to people who are relying on groundwater sources, for example, in Kelantan. So that are some of the impacts that can happen if sea level continues to rise. It is just how much it rises depends on the places. There are places that may increase more, and there are places that may not rise very much. Indirectly, the impact also varies according to the place. Only the scale we are not sure. For example, in Jakarta, um, there is a show, the BBC show called Equator from the Air by Gordon Buchanan. Okay, that documentary actually showed that the effect of sea levels started to happen in Jakarta, and they have started to move their capital to Kalimantan. But Malaysia, we still do not have the immediate need to move our administrative center to another place. And I like to point out that not all ice will cause sea level rise. Some ice have actually caused sea level rise. For example, we have three types of ice. We have the ice sheet, ice shelf, and also iceberg. The difference between these three ice is that ice sheet is basically the ice that is still grounded or that is still sitting on the continent. Okay, that is what we call as ice sheet. And then we have the ice shelf. So ice shelf is basically the floating ice, but it is still connected to the ice sheet. And then we have the iceberg. So iceberg is basically the freely floating ice. Okay, it's a freely floating ice. It has been calved from the ice shelf, and it's now the freely floating ice. So now iceberg has actually caused sea level rise because the mass from the iceberg has been displaced into the ocean water. Much like if let's say you have the ice water, and all the ice inside the water melted. Um, Whereas for ice sheet, because it has not um, displaced its mass into the ocean water, if let's say ice sheet melted, will cause sea level to rise.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, especially with regard to the differences between ice sheet, ice shelf, and also iceberg. I think not many of us are aware of that. That there is a difference between those three. Now you mentioned about Jakarta, Dr. Hafiz, and I'm aware of the documentary that you mentioned. It has been highlighted that it is one of the fastest sinking cities, causing environmental experts to warn that about one third of the country may sink by 2050 if groundwater, reserve extraction activities, rising sea levels, and also unusual weather patterns continue. Now, and as you said, this is one of the reasons why Jakarta, the Indonesia is moving its capital from Jakarta to another city in Kalimantan. Now, I remember some years back that somebody showed a map of Peninsular Malaysia, of the possibility of certain cities in the coastlines being inundated because of rising sea levels. So, are there places in Malaysia, in your opinion, that have this potential to, to basically sink?
Thank you very much for the question. This question is a bit tricky, but short answer to that question is that we are still not sure because there are many question marks that we have not solved yet. All the processes on Earth are interrelated. For example, the global warming causes the ice in Antarctica or Greenland to melt, which can cause sea level to rise, which can indirectly affect the socio-economic of the coastal population. So there is that chain reaction. But there are other processes that we still do not understand. That is also may also be a part of that chain reaction, but we don't understand that processes yet. For example, how much is the impact of ice sheet melting in Antarctica and Greenland can affect the sea level rise in Southeast Asia? A lot of people actually think that if let's say the Antarctica and Greenland melted, it may not cause sea level to rise in Malaysia because it is actually very far from Malaysia. Okay, but if you look about it, the ocean water around the world are continuous. Okay, so let's say for example we have the bathtub. Okay, we have the bathtub, and you turn on the tap water on one side. Okay, what will happen to the water inside the bathtub? Will it only increase at one side, whereas the other side will just maintain the same, or will the water in the bathtub basically just level up eventually? Okay, same goes to our Earth as well. Even though Antarctica and Greenland is very far from Malaysia, but that actually act like the tap water. Okay, so if let's say you have the water coming into the ocean, obviously it will cause sea levels to rise in Malaysia as well. But the thing is, um, um, we don't know how much it will rise yet. And because there are things that we don't understand yet, that has contributed to the uncertainty. And why is it that Indonesia has already showed signs of significant impacts from sea level rise, and why Malaysia have not yet, but may be visible in the future, given the close proximity of Malaysia and Indonesia within the Southeast Asia region? So the potential for Malaysia to be completely submerged, or some part of the Malaysia to be completely submerged, what I can say that is we are not sure yet, as it is still under study. But as far as we know, we don't think that the whole Malaysia will be completely submerged. Probably in some low-lying areas close to the coastal environment may be inundated, and it will not happen from one process only. Okay, like I mentioned just now, there is a chain reaction. So the chain reaction combining all these different processes together, for example, the sea rivers combined with the storm surge event can actually cause coastal erosion and basically inundation of land.
Now, there are also claims, Dr. Hafiz, that melting ice has the potential to increase zoonotic diseases, that is, diseases originating from animals that can infect humans. Now, what are your views on this?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I'm not expert in disease-related studies, and I do not study in detail about the zoonotic diseases. But according to my reading, for examples, Aedes disease. Okay, so Aedes mosquito will act more actively in tropical areas where the temperature and humidity is conducive for their survival. Hot and dry weather condition can also potentially cause the life cycles of Aedes mosquitoes from egg to adult mosquito to be much shorter, and so that actually cause the mosquito population to increase. Apart from that, for example, if let's say there is a sea level rise from melting ice, the low-lying region, as I have mentioned just now, can be inundated with sea or brackish water, where this can be a potential hotspot for the breeding of Aedes mosquitoes. Because there are some species of mosquitoes that can breed in brackish water. So for those of the listeners that not really sure what is brackish water means that the water is saltier than clear water, but it's less salty than the seawater. What I would like to point out is that um, there may not be a direct linkages between melting ice and the increase of zoonotic diseases, but it's basically the chain reaction. There is an indirect linkages between climate change and also zoonotic diseases. But climate change itself uh, um, changes the life cycle of some animal species that can threaten the risk of infections and also to our health. But we need to consult much more a person with more expertise if we wanted to further understand about this issue.
Right. Thank you for that view. I think basically we can agree that climate change is basically a domino effect. It will start to affect one thing, and that one thing will affect the rest. So I think this is something that we need to be aware of and also pay attention to. Now, people have been talking about climate change for many years now, and much of the picture that has been painted is that of doom and gloom. So, is there any hope to stop or delay or mitigate the effects of the devastating climate change impact? And what exactly can we do to address the issue of climate change?
Okay, that is a very good question. Actually, addressing about this climate change issue is really a challenge because it is a large scale impact. It's not a locality impact; it's a large scale impact. Um, so currently, we still do not have the silver bullet or the current. Nowadays, the one of the famous term is vaccine. We don't have the vaccine to address the climate change issue yet. Even we also don't have a lot of technologies to solve the problems related to climate change. In addition, climate change is basically long-term effect, literally meaning if let's say all of us, okay, we have how many? I think if I'm not mistaken, last time I did, we have around 8 billion peoples on Earth, okay, and let's say all of these 8 billion peoples are playing our role today or tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, next year or 5 years from now, the climate change issues may still persist, and it will take quite a long time before our initiative to help address the climate change issue will come to light. Given the condition that all human beings perform their role consistently, and the reason is because the damage is already there, and we
Mm.
have damaged the earth for far too long, starting since the industrial revolutions in 1850, 1880 up until now. But it is not to say that we should stop, but rather it is actually quite the opposite. The rising climate change issue has given us enough evidence and motivations to keep on continuing our efforts to combat climate change. And we are working to find a solution. And that is why we have the Paris Agreement, IPCC report published every 5 years to update on the latest information about climate change. We have the COP meeting, which is being currently held every year to see the commitment from each country to reach the Paris Agreement, and so on. And this issue is quite challenging, as I've mentioned, because the scale is large. It involves the whole world, meaning everyone in this world plays their role. And I'll give you an easy example. For example, recycling issue. Okay, so if let's say only one person have taken the initiative to do recycling, whereas the others don't really care, then probably that movement may not sustain. But I don't want to say don't do it. Okay, even if at least one person is doing it, it is actually a good stepping stone, and the others can follow eventually. So if everyone plays a role in tackling the issues of climate change, it is not impossible we can solve this problem in the future. Although it will take a long time, but if we all are consistent, we can overcome it.
Yeah, I think the key word there is consistency. It has to be in a sustainable manner, and it has to involve everyone for us to make an impact. I believe, although I agree it will take a long time because the damage has been done. Now, Dr. Hafiz, we are coming towards the end of the program. Perhaps to conclude, what is your advice to Malaysians in general and Muslims in particular?
Okay. My advice to the Malaysian citizens, the most important thing we must do is to change our lifestyles. Meaning to say, we should try to reduce our individual carbon footprint. Okay, so you can Google the specific definition of what is carbon footprint. But to put it in simple language, carbon footprint is basically how much carbon do we release as individual in our daily activities. That is the simple definition. For example, if let's say we ride a car alone, the carbon content from the smoke released from our car is the results from our action alone. Um, but if let's say we are practicing carpooling, for example, say we are sharing with another three people, so that makes four individuals in the same car. So the carbon content from the smoke is divided with four people. So that is the very simple examples of how do we reduce our individual carbon footprint. But that is basically what I meant about changing our lifestyle, try to reduce the individual carbon footprint. In addition, the authorities should also provide sufficient facilities to assist in dealing with climate change. For example, provide adequate or basically further improvise the current public facilities. So instead of us riding a private car, we can ride public facilities, but of course, it is not limited only to public facilities. There are many other initiatives that the authorities need to take part in dealing with the climate change issue. The question now is, how do we want to ensure that every inhabitant on this planet put our efforts together to address the climate change consistently, which may take a lifetime because the effect of our action will be seen in the future. Just like before industrial revolution began in 1850, 1880, but only now the effects visible. Apart from that, policies and laws related to climate change may need to be reviewed if necessary to suit with the current trend of climate action from the authorities, stakeholders, and the public, as well as the climate change issue itself. Um, the keyword that I wanted to point out over here is there are two keywords. The first is communication, and the second is cooperation. Good communication and cooperation between all parties are essential, very important in addressing issues related to climate change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz, for that very enlightening sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, respected listeners of the program, I hope that the sharing from Dr. Mohammad Hafiz bin Joffrey this afternoon has been an eye opener for all of us regarding the seriousness of the problem posed by global warming, melting glaciers, and rising sea levels. Awareness on this problem is important for all of us to take the necessary actions as Dr. Hafiz has highlighted. And this, as mentioned also in previous discussions, should always start with ourselves. Even if we are only one person, at least we are doing something. Most definitely, Islam, through its primary sources, the Quran and the Hadith, have provided us with many guidelines to observe and also act regarding interaction with the natural world. Now, if we can carry out the task of Khalifa according to Islamic teaching, inshallah, at the very least, I think we can slow down and mitigate the problems of climate change that we are currently facing. Now, before we end, I think it's only proper for me to express my sincerest gratitude to Dr. Muhammad Hafiz for joining us in today's episode of Man and Nature. I'm very confident that the information we obtain in today's program has been beneficial to our listeners and also to myself. Inshallah, we meet again, Dr. Hafiz, and thank you. And to all listeners, stay tuned to Radio Ikim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.